Shadows of the Erdtree has been a critical and financial success for both From Software and Bandai Namco, and is already on its way of not only being considered the best DLC of all time, but also having the chance of winning Game of the Year. The only time that has happened was with Blood and Wine, and to believe that another DLC will be able to top the quality of Blood and Wine is crazy to believe, but well done FromSoft, you guys pulled it off. And although there are some criticisms coming from some fans in regards to the difficulty of the game, the only thing I will say in regards to this sort of criticism is to just simply grow a fucking pair. It's From Software, their DLCs has always been known of being brutally difficult. What did you expect? And honestly, this rhetoric that particularly the bosses are too aggressive, give no reprieve, and force a playstyle to use shields and a poke stick is honestly fundamentally false. I finished the game, I finished the whole DLC without ever touching a shield. It is possible to beat it. It is possible to learn the patterns of the bosses. And also, this DLC gives you tons of ways of dealing with these bosses. So again, this rhetoric that these bosses are unbalanced, dude, yeah, don't believe that. It's utterly false. It's just coming from people that are growing frustrated of the fact that they cannot beat the boss with their preferred playstyle. That's just it. It's more, I don't want to say it's a skill issue because honestly it probably isn't. It's just people being stubborn. There's a saying in martial arts that is, styles make fights. A boss that may be unbelievably easy for me may be incredibly hard for you, and vice versa. That can happen a lot, particularly in this game. And also, most of these criticisms will go away after they go through the what do they call the post-boss clarity. So yeah, keep that in mind when you're reading those sort of criticisms, especially on Steam. So from that you already can see that I disagree with some of the criticism regarding the game difficulty and mechanics, but there is one criticism that I unfortunately will have to agree somewhat. One that is a bit more subtle, actually far more subtle. The lore. More specifically, this. And I mean, I follow Freya's questline, but what the fuck are you doing here? Somehow Radahn has returned, and for some reason that does not feel right. Mind you, that excusing this out of place reappearance from Radahn, I genuinely believe that the lore of the Lands of Shadow to be incredible. It gives not only answers to some long speculated theories from the lore community, but it also leaves a few questions to entice further speculation. Typical From Software quality and narrative design. But having Radahn as a final boss and concert to Miquella no less? Ooh, even if you consider FromSoft's style of storytelling to be quite open to interpretation, having Radahn here still feels out of place, especially considering what we know about his character. Let me make this perfectly clear. Radahn is not Gale, who had a purpose still needed to be fulfilled. Most importantly, his story is already so well-rounded and complete during the base game. The point that I'm trying to get is, having him here feels more like fan service than having any narrative weight. I mean, prior to the DLC, I failed to remember any item from the base game or any visual storytelling connecting Radahn to Miquella in any way. In fact, when I look at it this way, it feels like a last-minute decision from the writers. Which, by the way, I know it wasn't, alright? You can't come up with a boss design like this in the last months of development. It's From Software. They thought this through, or, well, I think they did. Although, in regards to Miquella, I'm not gonna go into too much detail of the lore details in this video in particular, since I'm just more putting out to light the fact that perhaps the disappointment from the fans of Radahn being the final boss may be justified. And going back into Miquella, that in regards to his character, the DLC does not really depict him in an unexpected way, at least not for me. I always had my suspicions that he would be this manipulative and megalomaniacal little shit. I mean, like mother like son, I guess. Miquella's story progresses like you would have expected, but it's difficult believing in Radahn would simply go along with it. I mean, look at how he's depicted in the base game. Radahn is depicted as one who would attempt to control his own fate, befitting of his Carian lineage. Like Ronnie and Rykard, he did his best to control his own fate to make sure that he wasn't a puppet to anyone else. The Scourge of the Stars, who defeated the very stars in a crushing victory. Dude, talk about guts, struggler-like character. It's no wonder that people find him one of his favorites. Their favorites in the base game. Hell, there's even some lore speculation suggesting that Radahn is actually being forced in the position of consort for Miquella at this point. Their lack of connection is still something difficult to swallow, especially considering another character that in my opinion would have made for a far better final boss, Godwyn the Golden. The Prince of Death seems to have more connections with Miquella's fate of all other demigods bar Malenia, and not having him take a bigger stage in the DLC feels kind of a waste. And I say that for two reasons. The first being what I mentioned already, his connections with the twins. In fact, the leading theory of the base game is that Miquella was attempting to somehow save Godwyn's soul. That would have made the last fight much more impactful, emotionally, seeing that Miquella finally succeeded in saving his beloved brother, and now they aspire to rule the lands between together in a benevolent sort of way. Forceful benevolence, but again, what you expect from this Griffith wannabe. The second reason is that we will likely never get to see anything more of Godwyn now. There is barely any mention of him in the DLC. And I sincerely doubt that FromSoft will spend another 2 years developing a second DLC for Elden Ring just to touch Godwyn as a character. The equivalent of Baldur for this universe will unfortunately remain a figure veiled in speculation, and I would be lying if I said that this doesn't make me a little sad. In fact, when I see the remembrance for Radahn, promised consort of Miquella, here's what it says. Miquella saw in Radahn a lord, his strength, his kindness that stood in stark contrast with their afflicted selves, and so Miquella made his heartfelt wish that Radahn would one day be his king consort. Reading this feels really weird because when he mentioned his kindness, that's not something that actually relates to Radahn, at least not to me. In fact, when you say kindness, it does feel like it's referring to Godwyn. Remember the conflict against the dragons? Leyndell against the dragons, the ancient dragons? Godwyn defeated Fortissax. And you could expect some cruelty and some final solution coming from the House of Gold, the House of Order that he comes from. He's a son of Marika after all. Instead of exterminating the dragons, he showed kindness to them. He accepted Fortissax as a friend, taking him by his side and starting the cult of the dragons. That shows kindness. Radahn, on the other hand, he's a warmonger. He's a warlord. He's a famed lion of the battlefield. He wanted to find an honorable death in the battlefield. That was his greatest wish. So using the word kindness and in stark contrast with their afflicted selves, again, something that also fits Godwyn really well because he also has two younger siblings who were also afflicted in some way or another. I mean, the Omen twins, Mohg and Morgard. It would have been easy to see Godwyn as taking pity on both the twins of Marika and Radagon, just like as he took pity on his two younger brothers, his younger direct brothers, because he knows how it feels. Again, his kindness and his contrast, because he's perfect. He is this world's equivalent to Baldur, and he was also strong. He won the war against the dragons. He defended Leyndell against the only threat that actually managed to breach its walls, and he was kind enough to show mercy to that enemy. This description of the remembrance fits more with Godwyn than it does with Radahn. Again, I can see why they would bring back Radahn for the DLC as a final boss. You can eventually find lore or reasons to explain why he is here instead of Godwyn. I know that. The lore is highly interpretative, sometimes I feel like it's a bit too much. But going back in regards to Godwyn, I still feel like he would have made a better fit here than Radahn ever could. In fact, he does not even feel that Radahn wishes to be here. He doesn't even have a line of dialogue. That was such a waste as well. Seeing that Radahn has no dialogue, because he is a character that definitely deserves to have at least one line of it being spoken. It would have been so good to see how his character actually expresses himself vocally, you know, to have him a personality. I mean, Malenia had a voice, Miquella had a voice, who else had a voice? Morgard was able to speak, Mohg. Those are very interesting characters, so much so that most of the lore theories are based around them. And also, going to Mohg, Radahn being here put into perspective some of the cruelty that Miquella actually possessed. Apparently he bewitched Mohg, and that goes completely against every single lore theory we had about Mohg. I mean, Mohg's probably still a bit of an asshole, but it still shows that Miquella can be just as cruel as his mother was in his pursuit of greatness, which is fitting to his character. in my view. I like the fact that he's not this all benevolent, all perfect type of character, that he actually has some darkness within him. But it would have been nice to see that being countermeasure with Godwyn, that now he is the Prince of Death, he is the incarnation of darkness in this world. But he would be the balance to Miquella, who is this Lord of Light that is actually corrupted from within, and perhaps looking this balance between both of them, Godwyn being the Lord of Darkness, while having some light within him, having the characteristics of a benevolent ruler, while Miquella giving off this allure of a benevolent ruler, of a benevolent god, is actually from within a very manipulative and tyrannical ruler. It would have been a far more impactful narrative point for the game if he was the consort of Miquella, and what also makes more sense, especially considering, again, the description of the remembrance, the lore in the remembrance of a god and a lord. Back in regarding what I think of this particular lore, I don't think it's particularly bad, but it's disappointing that we don't get to see other characters in the limelight, particularly Godwyn, because he's such an interesting character that's also veiled in speculation, just like Miquella was before this DLC. And not seeing him here feels like a wasted potential. I mean, Radahn, it makes sense for him to be here in a marketing standpoint, in a development standpoint. His original boss battle in the game, in the base game, is considered one of the best bosses, if not the best boss in the entire game. People love his character, people love the mechanic of his boss. He's the first quote-unquote raid boss in the history of the Souls-like genre. He's a really interesting guy to fight against, to learn about, so having him here feels like, again, fan service. Which is weird from Software, because you wouldn't expect them to go that route. It's not bad, it lets me feel a little bit disappointed, but I mean, it's just, maybe this is just me being sad that perhaps Godwyn, a character that I really much wanted to learn more about and possibly face in combat, will never seems to happen. But again, what do you guys think of this DLC's final boss? Are you happy with how the narrative went with Radahn and Miquella? Do you feel like it fits the story of Elden Ring? Leave it down in the comments and consider liking and subscribing. This has been the Discount Russian, and I'm out. Peace.